We humans have a tendency to go through cycles. Whether negative, positive, or flat out indifferent, the way people treat us is the way we tend to want to treat other people. Over the last couple of weeks, I've seen this picture going around on Facebook and Twitter and all the other social medias, and it's not really a picture, it's just words, but it looks like a picture. And it says something along the lines of, I don't care if you're black, white, Latinx, Asian, gay, straight, lesbian, bisexual, transgender. If you treat me right, I will treat you right. And every time that gets posted, it gets about 100 likes from people that really enjoy it, because it feels like it's right. It feels natural. The way you treat me is the way I'm going to treat you. So if you treat me nicely, I'll treat you nicely, and if you treat me poorly, well, watch out. This is what makes the golden rule so incredibly hard to live out. Do to others as you would have them do to you. So even if someone treats me terribly, I have to turn around and love on them because that's what I would want them to do to me. That doesn't feel right at all. It doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel easy. It certainly doesn't feel fun. I don't want to have to return evil with good. I don't want to have to return hatred with love. It's not natural. What's natural is doing to others as they have already done unto you. Now, this tendency is problematic in its own right, but it can be worse when it's combined with this other quirk of human behavior, shall we say. See, when people do things to us that bother us, we have this tendency to overestimate the offense that they have committed. And when we do things to other people to offend them, we have a tendency to underestimate just how bad the thing was that we did. So, we get these escalating cycles where something starts off really basic, maybe a mumbled comment that we didn't like, and we respond not with a mumbled comment in return, but with an out-loud statement of derision. And the out-loud statements of derision lead to a shouting match. And then the shouting match turns into less shouting with our mouths and more shouting with our fists. And before you know it, that mumbled comment over here becomes an all-out brawl. Because each step of the way, someone said, what you did to me was terrible, and I am going to return the favor, and I'm going to get revenge, and it's going to be equal, except it's not equal, because I've overestimated what you've done and underestimated what I'm doing, so I've escalated things. And these cycles happen all of the time. We participate in them, probably. We've done that before at some point in our lives. And it's this cycle of increasing offense and abuse which drives the story of Joseph.
Now Israel loved Joseph more than any other of his sons, because he had been born to him in his old age and made him an ornate robe for him. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any other of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. He said to them, listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field, and suddenly my sheaf rose and stood up upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it. His brothers said to him, do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us? And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. Then he had another dream, and he told it to his brothers. Listen, he said, I had another dream, and this time the sun and moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me. When he told his father as well as his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, what is the dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you? His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. Joseph went after his brothers and found them near Dothan. They saw him in the distance, and before he reached them, they plotted to kill him. "Here comes that dreamer," they said to each other. "Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns and say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams." When Reuben heard this, he tried to rescue him from their hands. "Let's not take his life," he said. "Don't shed any blood. Throw him into the cistern here in the wilderness, but they don't lay a hand on him." Reuben said this to rescue him from them and take him back to his father.
So the first offense that Joseph commits isn't really even his own. Joseph has 10 brothers at the moment. Eventually an 11th will come along. And Joseph's dad decides that he likes Joseph best. This is not a good decision for a father to make. But Jacob says, "Oh, Joseph is my favorite because he's my youngest, and he was born to my favorite wife." He had 4 of them. "And so I am going to shower him with love and gifts that I don't give his brothers." And so Jacob gets Joseph a coat. Now, this coat is not something that Jacob went down to the department store and said, "I want a really nice coat for my son." If he had tried to go to the department store to get a coat for his son, he would have had a really long time to wait because there wouldn't be department stores for at least a few more centuries. What probably happened here is Jacob went to an artisan weaver and said, "I want a really special coat for my special son," and spent some exorbitant amount of money buying this coat. Depending on the translation that you read, it's a multicolored coat, or a coat of fine cloth, or a coat with sleeves, but the message is more or less the same. This here is a real fancy coat that he's got on. And when you are a shepherding family, and part of shepherding means going out in the spring when the sheep are having their lambs in the cold weather and having to sleep by the sheep in case one of them is in distress while she's lambing, having a nice coat is a really handy thing to do. So giving Joseph the best coat is making Joseph's life the easiest, and of course, his brothers aren't too happy about this. Now this was Jacob's mistake. And maybe if this had been the only mistake, the brothers would have muttered and complained and gotten through and said, "We really hate that Dad did this, but it's not really Joseph's fault. We get that, so fine. We only hate you a little bit." But Joseph gets cocky. The family that we're talking about here, Jacob and Joseph and his 11 brothers, have this deep understanding of how dreams work. Every dream has a special meaning attached with it, and they pride themselves on being able to interpret dreams. So what happens is Joseph probably has dreams every night of the week, because most people do. But he gets up one morning, he's feeling really confident in himself. He says, "Hey, guess what? I had a dream last night. And it's about some corn, and we all had some corn, and your corn bound to my corn. So what do you think of that?" He knows what they're going to think of that. He knows exactly how they're going to interpret it. And lo and behold, they interpret it the way he expects, that he is going to rule over all of them, and they don't like it. But he gets away with it, and he's kind of happy about the fact that he's gotten away with it. So the next thing we hear is he gets up a few days later and decides to push his luck a little bit. He's like, "Hey, guess what? I had another dream last night. It was the stars were bowing to me, 11 of them, also the sun and the moon. So how about that?" And at that point, his dad, who also understands how dreams work and how they're being interpreted, says, "No, you don't get to say that. Because the sun and the moon are obviously me and your mother, and you don't get to be in charge of us." That's apparently where Jacob draws the line, is Joseph can be as much of a jerk as he wants to his brothers, as long as he doesn't bring mom and dad into it. Now, he's either foolish or arrogant or clueless enough to believe that he can just share these dreams without there being any repercussions. I don't know how anyone growing up with brothers can think such a thing would go by without some kind of retribution. But it turns out that his brothers are indignant enough that they wish to kill him, or at least to let him die.
Judas said to his brothers, "What will we gain if you kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood." His brothers agreed. So when the Midianite merchants came by, his brothers pulled Joseph up in the cistern and sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took him to Egypt. When Reuben returned to the cistern and saw that Joseph was not there, he tore his clothes. He went back to his brother and said, "The boy isn't there. Where can I turn now?" Then they got Joseph's robe, slaughtered a goat, and dipped the robe in blood. They took the ornate robe back to their father and said, "We found this. Examine it to see whether it is your son's robe." He recognized it and said, "It is my son's robe. Some ferocious animal has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces." Then Jacob tore his clothes, put on a sackcloth, and mourned for his son many days.
So the brothers decide that instead of killing Joseph, that'd be too easy, and there's no profit in it, that they're going to sell Joseph instead. They're going to sell him to actually their cousins. The Ishmaelites are descendants of Isaac, or of Ishmael, and Jacob's children are the grandchildren of Isaac. Isaac and Ishmael were half brothers. This is cousins interacting with one another. And they go and they say, "Hey, you want to buy our brother?" And their cousins say, "Sure, how much you want for him?" "Well, we don't like him that much, so 20 pieces of silver sound good to you?" "Yeah, that sounds perfectly fine to me." They make the deal, they sell Joseph, they send him off on his way, and then they go back to their brother, or not their brother, their father, hats in hands, they carry this coat that Joseph had to their father after dipping it in blood, and they're like, "Dad, we found this. Does it look familiar? It struck a bell, we're not sure, but we thought it might be your sons. Not our brothers, your sons." And they know it is, and he knows it is, and he sees the blood on it, and he's convinced that Joseph is dead. And that's where the story ends in Canaan, but it picks up in Egypt, with Joseph going through just a whole mess of different things. When he gets to Egypt, he's bought by Potiphar, the captain of the guard. And he starts off as a lowly slave in Potiphar's house, and he is a little less cocky than he was before. He's a little less arrogant. I guess being sold into slavery will do that to you. And he decides he's going to work hard and prove his worth. And he works really hard in Potiphar's house. And he's promoted and promoted and promoted until he becomes the head over all of the slaves. Which is about the time that Potiphar's wife takes a fancy to Joseph. Think he's cute. And she goes to him and says, "Hey, you're going to come sleep with me. That's one of your jobs now." Joseph says, "No, Potiphar did not give me that particular instruction. I think you are incorrect." And she says, "Yes, it is your job." And he says, "No." And she says, "Yes." And he says, "No." And she says, "Yes." And he says, "No." And finally, he's like, "I need to leave." So he tries to leave, and she lunges at him and isn't able to force him to have sex with her, but is able to take his coat away. Really, Joseph should just stop wearing coats. They're nothing but trouble. And after he leaves, she yells for her husband, and she says, "Potiphar, your head slave tried to have sex with me, and I stopped him, and you need to do something about that." Potiphar has no choice, and he sends Joseph to prison, where he is once again at the bottom of the food chain, and once again works his way up and works his way up out of humility and hard work, until the head guard looks at Joseph and says, "I don't really feel like doing my job. Would you like it? I'm not going to set you free, but you can be in charge of the prison and just let me know if there's any problems. And Joseph says, sure, I can do that. And while he's high up in the prison, these two men get thrown into prison. One of them is the cupbearer to Pharaoh, and one is Pharaoh's chief baker. See, Pharaoh had a bit of a temper on him. And when people crossed Pharaoh, or Pharaoh thought people had crossed him, they had nasty things happen to them. And actually, this cupbearer and this baker are getting off pretty easily because they got thrown in prison to await Pharaoh's verdict rather than being killed on the spot. And they are just a nervous wreck. They do not sleep. And when they do sleep, they have terrible nightmares. And they're complaining about their nightmares to one another. And Joseph, who knows a thing or two about dreams, comes up to them and says, hey, heard you having dreams. I know things about dreams. Would you like to tell me about them? And they tell their tales. And the cupbearer talks about how he dreams of crushing fresh wine from grapes and bringing it to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh drinks it. And Joseph says, oh, good news! So there were 3 vines in your dream, so that means in 3 days, Pharaoh drank the cup. You get to go back, you get to work for Pharaoh again in 3 days. That's cool. And the baker's really excited. He's like, I'm going to get free too. And he goes up and he says, okay, so my dream, I had these 3 baskets of bread, and I was taking them to Pharaoh, and these birds came down, and they ate the baskets. And Joseph goes, 3 days. Also, there's a 3 days thing in there. You're going to say what? You're going to get killed. Sorry. Hey, cupbearer, you got good news from me. When you're working for Pharaoh again, maybe tell him about the guy in prison who knows things about dreams. Maybe he has some use for me. And the cupbearer says, sure, of course I'll remember you. 3 days pass, the baker is executed, and the cupbearer goes back to his job and promptly forgets about Joseph, who continues to have to reside in prison until Pharaoh starts having bad dreams. And no one can tell Pharaoh what these dreams mean. And finally, the cupbearer, who's been by Pharaoh's side every day through this whole ordeal, and has watched Pharaoh day after day say, I need someone who can interpret my dreams, finally he's like, oh right, I know a guy. There's this guy at the prison, he did a thing, I'll go get him for you. Goes and gets Joseph, and he brings Joseph before Pharaoh, and Joseph says, what are your dreams, Pharaoh? Pharaoh tells him about these 2 dreams he's been having. One in which he sees 7 beautiful, well-fed, fat cows who get eaten by 7 sickly, starved cows. And then this other one where these 7 wheat stalks that just look beautiful and have more wheat on them than there's ever been any wheat in the world get eaten by 7 barren, mangy, disgusting-looking wheat stalks. And Joseph says, hey, I know what that means. Here's what's going to happen. There's going to be 7 years where you are going to have more crops than you possibly know what to do with. You are going to have bountiful harvest after bountiful harvest, and immediately at the end of those 7 years, nothing's going to grow. You're going to have terrible famine for the next 7 years. So what you need to do is you need to put away the extra from the first 7 years, store it, and then you'll have food for the other 7 years. This is God warning you so that you won't do something stupid like waste all of your food. Pharaoh says, great, you can be in charge of that. So he puts Joseph in charge of the entire nation of Egypt with the exception of himself. Well, the bumper crop years and the famine years did not just strike Egypt, they also struck Canaan, where Joseph's family lived. And Joseph's family did something stupid. They ate all of their extra food because they had not had the dreams about the cows and the wheat. And when the famine years came, they had no food. And Jacob said to 10 of his sons, I hear there's food in Egypt. You should go down and get some. I'm keeping Benjamin here, by the way. Benjamin is Joseph's little brother, born of the same wife who has become Jacob's new favorite. He apparently didn't learn his lesson. But the other 10 of you, I'm not as worried about you. There's 10 of you. You can go down to Egypt, come back with food. They go down to get the food. Joseph lets them have the food, but not before he messes with them a little bit. They have no idea who he is because he's grown up and he looks like an Egyptian. And he says, I don't believe you. You said that there were 12 of you, but there's only 10 of you here. And the brothers say, well, there were 12, but one of us died, and the other's home with our dad. Joseph says, I don't believe that. I maybe buy the dead brother thing. That sounds plausible, but home with your dad? No way. So here's what's going to happen. I will send 9 of you back with food. And the other one, you're going to go to prison. And you're just going to stay there until the rest of you come back down with your other brother. Joseph is testing his brothers to see if they've changed, if they're treating Dad's favorite maybe a little bit better. And they go home and they tell Jacob of all that occurred, and Jacob's really sad to have lost Levi, but he writes him off as a loss. Well, I guess I'm not getting that son back, because I am not sending Benjamin down to Egypt. Who knows what's going to happen? And his resolve is strong, and he refuses, and he sticks to his guns until they run out of food, and he's hungry. And then he says, okay, you can take Benjamin. And they go back down one final time, and Joseph sees Benjamin and sees the way that his brothers have actually honored their word and thinks, maybe they've changed, but then again, I don't think they've changed. So he hides a cup in Benjamin's bag. And he says, okay, have a nice time in Canaan, see you later. And then he sends the guards after them to recover the cup and accuses Benjamin of being a thief. He wants to see if the brothers are ready to sell out Dad's favorite again. And thankfully for them, they pass the test. They all fall on the ground in front of Joseph and say, please, no, you can't take away Benjamin from us. Our dad will never let us hear the end of it. It's going to be a whole thing. Just, look, take me, put me in prison, put him in prison. Do not put Benjamin in prison. Joseph is impressed that they've seemed to have matured a little bit. I'm not so sure that he's matured all that much, playing practical jokes on his brothers, but his brothers appear to have matured. So he reveals who he is, and he welcomes his family to come live with him in Egypt, says he'll just take care of them, bring Dad down, bring your moms down, bring everyone down. It's going to be great here in Egypt. And that's what they do. But the fear stays in his brothers' hearts. They're still worried that there's going to be some kind of retribution against them. And then Jacob dies. And Joseph's brothers are worried, now that he's dead, that Joseph will turn on them.
When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, what if Joseph holds a grudge against us and pays us back for all the wrongs we did to him? They sent word to Joseph saying, your father left these instructions before he died. This is what you are to say to Joseph. I ask you to forgive your brothers the sins and the wrongs they have committed in treating you so badly. Now please forgive the sins of the servants of the God of your father. When their message came to him, Joseph wept. His brothers then came and drew themselves down before him. We are your slaves, they said. But Joseph said to them, don't be afraid. I am in the place of God. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. So then, don't be afraid. I will provide for you and your children. And he reassured them and spoke kindly to them.
Now, Jacob does not appear to have said any of these things. So Joseph's brothers are coming and saying, Dad said you have to be nice to us and not kill us with your super Egyptian powers. So could you maybe do that? And they're very worried. They are convinced that this cycle of violence that plagued the early parts of their life is going to rear its head now that Jacob is gone and can't intercede for them. Because Joseph is an incredibly powerful man now. He can do whatever he wants so long as it doesn't impact the life of Pharaoh. And I can guarantee you that what Joseph chose to do with his brothers who were his house guests would have no impact on the life of Pharaoh. He is perfectly poised to deal the final blow in this revenge cycle. He could enslave them. He could kill them. He could banish them. He could sentence them to hard labor. He could do whatever he wanted, and he would have the full backing of the state to do it. And he doesn't. Instead, he looks past this humiliation that he suffered as a slave. He looks past the years that he spent in that filthy prison. He looks past the decades that he was forcibly separated from his parents and all of those that he loved, and he sees that as of right now, he's got it pretty good here in Egypt. And even though his brothers had hoped that their actions would lead to his ruin, the difficult path that they set him on led to the prophecies that he cockily gave as a teenager coming true. He did, in fact, rule over his family. They did, in fact, bow down before him as he said they would. So he flips the script. He chooses to be the bigger man because he knows that he has the power to do it. He forgives them. And that act of forgiveness puts an end to that whole cycle of violence that had been going on for decades. This is a great literary ending. We've had all these conflicts and all these ups and downs, and finally we have this great resolution at the end of the story. But you know it would be even better than a great literary ending if they had ended this ridiculous cycle of revenge before it ever began. In our lives, we have people, have had people, will have people who commit offenses against us. And we can respond in kind. And we can start a cycle whose end we cannot possibly know. Or, if we are in a position where we have the power and privilege to do so, we can nip it in the bud and choose to end the cycle then and there. Now, in just a few minutes, we're going to be singing a prayer together. The prayer that we use every single week, using the same words, and we will ask God to forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And as we prepare to do so, the question put before us by the story of Joseph is this: do we mean that? Are we really ready to be forgiven only as much as we have forgiven others? Or do we maybe have a little bit more forgiving of our own to do before we're truly comfortable with the implications of those words?